keep forgetting to turn down my own music. Hello, everybody. Welcome to a Thursday night special edition of Narrative. It's really good to be with you tonight. How are you, Heidi?
I am well and very excited. This is a show that we'd hoped to bring Tuesday, and here it is already Thursday, and we're ready to go.
It has been a busy week. We've been on the air like every night, or tried to be on the air. We had a power failure on the Tuesday when we intended to do the show, but we're bringing it to back a bit. Okay. That's a mistake thing that I just figured out. It only happens on Thursdays. So tonight's just really interesting because we're going to be talking about Michael Flynn, the former general, disgraced general who seems to be running around the country brainwashing people in what seems to be ominous tones of a cult, or at least a very religious church movement that he has literally taken the prayer out of and is repeating the prayer at these events. And we'll explain all of that in a bit because that doesn't sound very clear to me. But the whole thing is about, is Michael Flynn really, morphing himself and designing himself as sort of an American Fuhrer, a future leader with adoring crowds that will do absolutely anything he says? Because it certainly feels to those of us who watch it pretty closely that he is becoming some sort of figure like that, where he's really got a brainwashed crowd and are incredibly supportive of him and will do anything for him, which is kind of terrifying considering he's not considered that stable. You're going to be on the chat rooms, right?
Yes, I am. I'm already here watching all the Twitter love come in from our viewers. So yes, please tag me on questions. We'll try to get the questions answered from our guests, and away we go.
And the guests are Jim Stewartson, whom we love, who's on the show all the time, and sometimes I steal material from, but I do it openly and honestly, and I hope he doesn't mind. So Jim will be on the show along with the son of I'm going to get the name wrong.
Elizabeth Clare Prophet. This is going to be a fascinating time. Her son, Sean Prophet, who knows more than anything how these cults work, is going to be joining us today.
It's really exciting. You remember her. She was like in the 90s. She was on Larry King and Oprah a lot. She was just a really famous figure. So we'll dive into a little bit of the history and see how it connects to Michael Flynn. All of that is coming up. But first, we have the starting block. And three big names in the starting block tonight. Look at these nice faces you don't really want to wake up to. Oh my God, look at him. I swear, Bannon has never looked worse in his life, but he's still only got one shirt on there, which is his one shirt days. Boris Johnson, of course, and Vladimir Putin all making up our top three. What's in the news with all these gentlemen?
Yes, it's kind of a goon starting block. Today's the day we've been waiting for. Steve Bannon may actually go to jail. We hope he does, because then he can't run his podcast and radicalize people. January 6th committee says they're going to convene on Tuesday and refer Bannon for contempt. And we think Tuesday may be a bit far off. What say you, Zev?
We'll see what happens. I'm really interested in hearing him testify, to be honest. I'd rather he testified than showed up in prison, but prison's not a bad second prize for Steve Bannon, who's really escaped prison so many times. He's got like 9 lives. He's been this close to being in jail many, many times before, and each time he's gotten out. So it'll be interesting to see if he can get away with it this time. I think the jury's still out on whether he can. Also in the news tonight, Boris Johnson is a corrupt leader, as we've suspected he is for a very long time. The UK Prime Minister has a nice little refuge, a nice little villa, I guess. I'm doing your story. It's your story.
This comes out of the Pandora Papers leak. Boris plays whilst tax havens rage. If leaders are going to benefit from being able to hang out in gorgeous villas in the south of Spain that are obscured by offshore hide your money tax havens, then will there really be the kind of reforms we need to get the dark money from corrupting our democracy?
I mean, I don't think anyone has any desire to actually reform these things. I think it's interesting that we're getting all the data, I must say. But having said that, there are some attempts, at least in the United States, to try get FinCEN to be monitoring some of these offshore holdings a little bit more carefully. I mean, is going to change Boris Johnson? I don't think Boris Johnson is going to change for anybody. So maybe it means changing Boris Johnson, like getting a new prime minister.
That would be a great start.
It would be. And the third story tonight in our starting block is something to do with Vladimir Putin and crypto.
Yeah, Putin basically says crypto has the right to exist, sort of. Anything to destabilize fiat currency, that's kind of his game. But what's interesting is he's saying that he doesn't really think it should be used for the things that he sells, the government commodities that he sells. So it's kind of a classic Putin-esque.
Yeah. But, he must be a big fan of it because it's all used for money laundering. He seems to be among the world's biggest money launderers. So, it wouldn't be a bad thing for him to have crypto in Russia. And don't they already have all the Ethereums and all of that? Isn't that really aren't they Russian inventions?
Yeah, well, that is what some folks say. And here he is, going on the record saying he's all for it, sorta.
Right. Sort of. Well, that's the starting block tonight. We're meant to go into commercial break. We don't have that, so just heads up, everybody. We're going to go right into our main feature story here, which is all about Mr. Michael Flynn, General Michael Flynn, an American Fuhrer. So let me, without too much of a delay here, because I normally do this in the commercial break, but I can't. Let me say good evening to Jim Stewartson. Hi, Jim.
Hi.
And Sean Prophet. How are you, Sean?
Good. How are you, Zev? Thanks for having me.
I'm going through that first section of the show, which is always very confusing for me. It's great that you're here. And I really want people to get to know who you are because your story is fascinating. Your mom's story is fascinating. And we'll get to Michael Flynn in just a second. But just briefly tell us who you are and how your mom became who she was.
Well, it's kind of hard to put that into a very short segment, but
just tell us who she was then.
Well, my mother was I would say, New Age cult leader, for want of a better description. And her church was in what they call the Western esoteric tradition, if you want to put it charitably, or other people would call it a doomsday cult. Mm-hmm. So the organization
Which would you call
started
it?
by. Well, it was definitely a doomsday cult.
Right.
And it's still a very right-wing organization, even without her presence.
What's the name of the organization?
It's called the Summit Lighthouse, or Church Universal and Triumphant it's actually kind of gone back and forth between those two names.
Mm-hmm. Big church. I mean, it really was a big movement the 80s and 90s.
Yeah, I'd say, we had this bomb shelter building period, which was based on some of her prophecies for nuclear war with the Soviets. Mm-hmm. And ironically, that was kind of going on at the same time as the Soviet Union was disintegrating.
Right.
And so, here we are building these bomb shelters. It's like 1989, and everybody knows what happened in 1989. I mean, the wall came down and all kinds of stuff. And so I guess she was really in this Cold War mentality and had been for many, many years. And I think that she might have seen the Gorbachev and Glasnost and Perestroika as a bit of a deception. Mm-hmm. And that, like, when the West would let its guard down, then that's when Gorbachev was going to strike. She didn't realize he was pretty much a man of peace.
Yeah. He was also sort of America's man. I mean, it's not untrue that Russia did land up striking. I mean, they seem to have struck us in 2016, many, many years later. But you're right about that period of time in terms of him being a man of peace. Jim, let's talk a little bit about Michael Flynn, because anyone you ask who knows Michael Flynn, and I've done this to a few people, describe him as being, charitably, they say he'd lost it. Some people say he's crazy. Some people say he's not balanced. I mean, that's sort of the reaction you get from people who know and consider him sort of, friendly. It does seem to me like he's not the same person that became a general and went to Afghanistan and did everything he did until a period of time. He was considered a good soldier, right? I mean, he was sort of a hero in some pockets of America.
Yeah, well, I mean, he was always difficult. In the military, but he got stuff done. He knows what he's doing. It's the reason why he got to the head of the DIA.
Right. Which he did under Obama, right? He became the head of the. Yeah, go ahead.
That's where I'm going. In 2014 he got fired by a black man, and that did not sit well with him. You
think that's the primary reason they got fired by a black man? You think that's really the?
I think it's one of them. I think Flynn is deeply racist. He's a white supremacist. He just fundamentally is. And in 2014 is when he started being seen with Russian honeypots quite a bit as well.
Right. Interesting. As one does.
And then in 2015 he joined the Trump campaign immediately, which I didn't know right away. So he,
and also got fired by Donald Trump. So he got fired by a black man and a white man. Both were presidents, but at least
Trump did that under duress. Needless to say, Trump was perfectly happy with Mike Flynn where he was. But Mike Flynn got caught dead to rights talking to the Russians before he was in office.
Right. Remember that he was texting or paging people while he's sitting there at the inauguration. The Russian ambassador Kislyak. Yeah.
That was about the nuclear reactors that he was trying to sell at the inauguration.
Wow.
It's like for the Saudis. Yeah.
Yeah. You know, it's interesting. There's just a story
the dirtiest piece of shit that ever walked the earth. Let's be perfectly
honest. I was hoping you were going to say something like that, which I couldn't say myself, but I'm glad those words came out. That's your opinion. There you go.
You know, it's interesting that way from the start, and then got worse.
There's new information about his Saudi.
That's right. He started creating this cult. At 2016 is he started Pizzagate. 2017 was QAnon, and now he got his pardon and he thinks he's free. Yeah. Although he's committed about 1.5 billion crimes in the last 9 months, and I have no idea why he's not behind bars.
I think what you're saying is really important for people to realize. This is the same person who got fired by Obama, got fired by Trump for whatever reasons they were still fired. It's the same person who created Q. It's the same person who did Pizzagate. It's the same person that did the anti-vax movement, we think. Is that right? Maybe it's not entirely that.
Yeah,
but it's the same movement.
No. He's pushing ivermectin with his brothers.
Right, exactly. So you've got a situation where this guy has been responsible for most of the conspiracy theories that have captured the imagination of the right wing in America over the last few years, and a former, really senior intelligence director in the military. So not a dummy, and certainly knows his way around psyops.
Golden psyop.
Yeah, exactly. Now it's interesting. This has just came out last week. Not this particular letter, but there's two things that happened in his relationship with Saudi Arabia that we didn't really know about. We knew that he was pushing all these nuclear nuclear reactors. They did this huge kind of crazy deal where they were going to supply Saudi Arabia with nuclear reactors that were being designed in the United States but built in Russia or something like that. It was an insane idea, obviously not very good for security. It was going to start a nuclear arms race between Iran and Saudi Arabia. And just last week we found out that he wasn't doing this all because he felt good about all these things, about nuclear reactors and nuclear arms races. He did it for a little bit of money. Apparently he got paid $200,000 over 2 years, which is new information to me at least. Maybe others have seen it, between in 2015 and 2016, each year, $100,000. So nice money if you can make it.
Too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But he's not a wholesome guy.
Part of that.
Sorry.
To say the least.
Yeah, no, he's
not. Bernie Carrick was part of that.
Oh, they got Bernie Carrick. Then talk about wholesome characters.
They got him dead to rights again. Yeah. I mean, he already went to prison for being a.
And so, what this leads us to is you've got Michael Flynn, and then you've got Sean's mother, and you've got a situation that you've been able to find that there is a correlation between the two scripts, I guess. I don't know. The prayers, they're scripts, they're sermons. I don't know what they would be. It's a prayer.
No, it's a prayer. Yeah. It is a prayer written by Elizabeth Clare Prophet for the Church Universal and Triumphant.
And it's exactly the same one?
Read it. It's the same. The only thing that he did was change the pronoun to we instead of I, because it's supposed to be something you say to yourself.
Right.
But he was getting an entire Christian congregation who had no idea where this prayer came from, where most of the members would think it's basically satanic if they had any idea what it was. Right. And he involuntarily got them to commit heresy.
So basically he's been going around the country and telling people that they have to believe in what he believes in, basically, which is his sort of white nationalistic ideals and his, fear that the communist Chinese are taking over America. And then on top of that, he lays over the anti-vax stuff. And then on top of that, he lays on this cult prayer that Elizabeth Clare Prophet originally wrote. Wow. And how did you come to discover that it's the same thing? That you didn't did you Google it? How does it show up?
I watch basically all of Mike Flynn's stuff because I think he's the most dangerous man in America and the worst traitor in American history. So I watch all of his things. I've also learned a great deal about different ideologies, including occult ideologies and extremist religions and et cetera. And so when I was listening to his speech and I heard him talk about 7 rays, look, I'm an atheist. I don't know anything about Christianity, or I didn't before.
Right.
But having been immersed in all this stuff, I was like, that doesn't sound too Christian to me.
Yeah.
And so I took, I did some Googles, and there it is. It's I Am. I Am is a theosophical cult.
Oh, right.
Based on theosophy, and Mark Prophet came out of the I Am cult to create the Church Universal and Triumphant.
Interesting.
So
when I asked Dave Troy what I Am it was all about, and he basically said it's just a very dangerous cult. And so
I can tell you all about it if you want. But
yeah,
yes, it is.
And so you've got Elizabeth Clare Prophet as well, which you described as a cult, and then the logical progression is you got to go to Michael Flynn and say, really dangerous cult.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, he's trying to bring these ideas, these other ideas, right, into these religions. It's a very dangerous thing called syncretism. What you do is you leverage the beliefs of others, of what people believe, to basically appropriate them into your own ideology.
Amazing.
So the Nazis appropriated Christianity and appropriated paganism and a whole bunch of other stuff in order to create the cult that killed tens of millions of people.
Let's take a look at the tape you produced. It's really good. And then, Sean, you can jump in and give us your thoughts. But it's really fascinating to watch this tape. This is Jim Stewart's tape of Elizabeth Clare Prophet and Michael Flynn, sort of a mashup, if you will. Here you go.
Mighty I am present. I am here, O God, and I am the instrument of those sevenfold rays and archangels.
We are your instrument of those sevenfold rays and all your archangels. All of them.
And I will not retreat. I will take my stand. I will not fear to speak. And I will be the instrument of God's will, whatever it is.
We will not retreat. We will not retreat. We will stand our ground. We will not fear to speak. We will be the instrument of your will, whatever it is.
Here I am, so help me God, in the name of Archangel Michael and his legions. I am freeborn, and I shall remain freeborn, and I shall not be enslaved by any foe within or without.
In your name, and the name of your legions, we are freeborn, and we shall remain freeborn, and we shall not be enslaved by any foe, within or without.
So I'm going to stop it there. But Sean, give us your reaction. I mean, that's pretty powerful. I don't think Americans realize this is what Michael Flynn is doing. I don't think they realize that Michael Flynn is running around the country with these very expensive events. It looks like a very big production, preaching all this stuff. He's not a preacher.
Well, that was at a church. That was at an existing charismatic Christian church, which is part of the reason why it was so brutal, honestly, is because those people had no idea that he was dropping that on them. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
Wow. Go ahead, Sean.
Yeah, so what I want to say about this is that, of course, I'm very familiar with my mother's dictations. That's what that was. She gives these channeled gave when she was alive, these channeled messages. And that one was supposedly from Archangel Michael, right? And on my podcast, I co-host a podcast called The Radical Secular. And on that podcast, I gave about a 10-minute breakdown as to what that prayer means. And I don't think we have time for that here. But what I'll just say specifically is what is really dangerous about this is the concept of God's will. And God's will is weaponized by a lot of cult leaders, fascists. Throughout history, people have gotten others to do things in the name of God, and we're seeing this happen now with the Republican Party across the board, where they are just using openly theocratic language in all of their messaging and on social media, and even their TV spots, and like all of it's just God, God, God. And when someone appropriates the will of God, it's unknowable. The will of God is not, nobody has any idea what that is. But when someone makes people believe they are doing the will of God, it ramps up things up to like 11, and in terms of what they're willing to sacrifice, what they're willing to do, what they're willing to even die for potentially.
Right.
And I saw this as I was growing up a lot, where people who were in the organization would have done anything for my parents. And that's because they were convinced that my parents were doing the will of God and knew what that will was. And now we see this being weaponized by American fascists, and it's frightening.
It really is a weaponization of faith. I mean, there's no other way to describe it. Like, they've taken the fundamental of faith, which is what everyone, a lot of people I suspect in America believe in, and they've weaponized it. They turned it into a political weapon, and it's now killing people when it comes to things like anti-vax movement. But even Michael Flynn, seems to be openly planning for a civil war of some sort. I mean, it's being really weaponized in a terrible way.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Yeah. And I would say that this is something I had a quote from Barry Goldwater that I had ready for this show, because I think it's really appropriate. And now Barry Goldwater, he's this war hawk. He's an arch conservative dude who lost the 1964 election to Lyndon Johnson. And he even was afraid of what would happen. And here's what he said. He said, "Mark my word, if and when these preachers get control of the Republican Party, and they're sure trying to do so, it's going to be a terrible damn problem. Frankly, these people frighten me. Politics and governing demand compromise, but these Christians believe they are acting in the name of God, so they can't and won't compromise. I know. I've tried to deal with them." So think of who that was coming from.
Right. Think about that. And then go ahead.
That's right. Goldwater went as far as to say, if these preachers get a hold of the Republican Party, that it will be the end of the Republic as we know it. He repeatedly said this is going to infect our political system and could absolutely be the end of our democracy.
Which is exactly what the CNP, the Council for National Policy, that we talk about a lot in the show, is been doing. It's really quite chilling when you think about it all.
It's dominionism. I've been thinking about this word a lot. What does it mean, and how does it cover all of these different religions and cults? And the reason why I think we're seeing this huge merging of all these cults, especially doomsday cults, is because they all have a shared project. The shared project is to get rid of democracy because it's in their way.
It's in their way.
And so it doesn't matter whether you're an extremist Catholic or
you keep talking. I'm just playing this guy.
So like this guy. Yes. So this is Sean Pugh, who is a charismatic Christian dominionist. Later on in this video, Josh Hawley shows up to do a whole bunch of apocalyptic Jesus talk.
Right.
In front of the Capitol that Josh Hawley helped to have
an insurrection.
Attack.
That's the word.
Yeah. Attacked.
So what's happening here? And this guy does all of this stuff. He's got super hypnotic things where everybody's like in this part, they're all chanting. And
just listen in for a second.
Super G's.
Yeah. The government will be upon his shoulders. The government will be upon his shoulders. We are so blessed and privileged tonight. We're honored to have a sitting U.S. Senator.
Well, we'll get to Hawley in a bit because that's a whole other thing. But it is hypnotic. It is hypnotic.
It's hypnotic, and when he says government on his shoulders, that means God, right?
Yeah.
What he's saying is overtly that he wants a theocracy.
Wow.
So is Flynn. So are all these guys. They are overtly saying that America was designed as a religious country.
Yeah.
and that we have somehow gotten away from God's law as the rule of law. That's
is
the
exactly
line that Flynn
the
said a couple days ago.
Which is exactly the opposite of the
why
truth.
our goddamn country
Yeah.
was founded, was to
Yeah.
get literally away from that.
Wow.
I want to point something out about theocracy too, and also about end times movements and apocalypticism in general, and that is they basically only come up when these groups have failed to take over politically. They have failed at winning democratic elections. They no longer have the mandate of the people, and so now they bring in this authoritarian God stuff to try to say, like, we have, and now you have, Stop the Steal and all the election conspiracies, right? Because what these people realize is that demographically they're not doing well. Evangelical Christianity is not doing well, and young people don't like it. Their policies, abortion policies, are totally out of step with where America is, and they are trying to now overturn democracy because they couldn't win at the ballot box.
It's the ultimate form of self-preservation, and they feel justified because it is. Yeah. And it's setting up a us and them conflict, which is almost unavoidable, because that's the only place you can go when you talk about these this kind of hypnotized, brainwashed crowd. I mean, they're not going to change they're not going to compromise. They're not going.
What do you do with 30% of the country who is basically built to be, an anti-democracy zombie?
Yeah,
I mean,
exactly.
If you believe that Joe Biden isn't the president, then you're in a cult, and that's at least 25% of the population believes that.
God doesn't lose elections, right? I mean, God always wins.
That's right.
And so,
that's right.
It's so interesting.
That's why, and it doesn't matter what God, right? Part of the most pernicious thing here is that the people really behind this, the people with the hundreds of billions of dollars who are doing it, they don't give a shit. It's not about ideology for them. It's about using ideologies to destroy the fabric of liberal democracy, small l, small d, and that's the what we're facing right now is a bunch of incredibly powerful, wealthy people who are creating a cult in order to destroy our democracy, and it's working.
Right, it is working.
We're dicking around with norms and stuff and not arresting people, and it's the most infuriating thing in the world.
It is. Now there's a request, I guess Heidi's suggesting that we try to raise your volume. I can't do it that much more with your volume, but if you can get closer to your microphone, that'll help, Jim. Heidi, anyone else saying anything on the chat rooms?
I can be louder. I'm good at that.
I'm sure you can.
Be louder, Jim.
Let it out. Let it out.
I'm trying.
Yes.
I'm trying to be understated, but I will be less.
No, this is the wrong show for understatement, Jim. So it's a very vibrant chat. We have a lot of people concerned about why Michael Flynn is not going to prison. But before that, one of the first questions is about Sean. Our viewers can't imagine being the son of a cult leader. And maybe you could speak a little bit about your experience and then how you got out.
Certainly. Yeah. Well, it was obviously, there were good things and bad things about it. One of the good things about it was that I had a lot of people who cared about me, and I got to learn a lot about publishing and video and audio and everything you can think of in terms of what we did as a publishing organization. So that was good. But as far as what it was like to be the son, I mean, I was always in that shadow, right? People wanted to get to know me to get to her. And so it was finding my own voice and figuring out who I was, was something that didn't happen till later. I did leave when I was, probably 19 or so. And then I came back into the organization maybe 2 or 3 years later and became a minister, an ordained minister. And I was, that happened when I was 23. And then at the age of 30, that was sort of after the bomb shelter kind of fiasco. And when that prophecy failed and it just wasn't clear to me that the organization was going in a good direction, and I kind of had a crisis of faith, and I just decided, you know what, this is too much for me. I need to get out of here. So
let's talk a little bit about that period, that period of the bomb shelters, because there's a really interesting Nightline documentary, and I want to play a piece of it. But set it up for us by telling us what the church was trying to do over there in Montana. They basically bought a big ranch and had started building communities.
Yeah. So in 1981, I believe it was, we made a deal on the Forbes Ranch in Park County, Montana. And so at that time, the idea was to sort of set up a self-sufficient community, farming and ranching, and with the eventual, idea of setting up, where people could build homes and live, and it would be, like this kind of idyllic community. Mm-hmm. But then between like 81 and 86, my mother's prophecy started to get a lot darker, and she started forecasting nuclear war. And I believe the initial date was October 2nd, 1989, that she had predicted for the war. And then there were a couple of reprieves, and the date got pushed back to 1990, and then later. But the point is that by 1987, January 1st of 1987, we were sort of pulling out because the organization had a lot of centers in, most major cities in the United States and a lot of cities around the world. Mm-hmm. And those centers were being closed, sold. People were moving to Montana because of this prophecy. And so as the date became closer, there was a lot more urgency to get these shelters done. And there was also, people were spending a lot of money to get food and weapons. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that happened was my stepfather was involved in a weapons deal.
A pretty large one, right? There's a lot of weapons.
Yeah. He provided some money to someone else named Vernon Hamilton, and Vernon Hamilton was out buying these weapons under a false name. Now, these weapons were legal. It's anybody can buy guns, but you have to say you have to be who you say you are. Mm-hmm. And so, but these weren't just ordinary guns; these were 50 calibers.
Yeah.
And you don't need a 50 caliber gun for anything other than some sort of military operation.
So go ahead, finish. I apologize.
Oh, that's all right.
So exciting.
It brought down scrutiny when they bought these guns, and they ran the ID, and it turned out to be a dead guy. And so then they arrested Vernon, and then that led back, his notes and things and financial records led back to my stepfather. And so he also went to jail.
Wow. The whole thing was about your mom was prophesizing that the end of the world was coming, that nuclear war was coming, that was going to create a lot of desperation, famine, starvation. And that's why they needed the guns, presumably. They were going to fight off the masses who were not prepared for the war or for the nuclear Armageddon, who were going to come get their supplies or foods or whatever. That was the sort of the rationale behind it.
This is the problem with survivalism generally, right? Because the implication is if you're storing a bunch of food and if something really ever does go wrong, you're going to be either going to have to kill people or you're going to have to give people your food. Right. And so that's the problem with preppers and survivalism in general, is that it's essentially you're pre-giving up on society. You're pre-giving up on the idea that we have to deal with a crisis together as a civilization. Mm-hmm.
So let's look at what Ted Koppel did with Nightline. You actually feature in this documentary. So people should look out for a young Sean in this little clip that I play. I'm only going to play about a minute of it. Everyone's microphone is on, so if you need to mute it or do whatever, that's good. But I'm going to leave your faces up because I like to see everyone's reaction. So here is the documentary from Nightline from 1990.
I don't believe in pacifism. And I believe that if you are attacked in your home and somebody's going to rape your wife and kill you and your children, that you better defend yourself or you're going to have the karma for allowing all those lives to be taken.
Many residents claim the church's frenetic rush to prepare for the end of civilization is also hurting the environment. The main bomb shelter, with room for 750 people and an entranceway big enough for an 18-wheel tractor trailer, is being built in what was once prime habitat for grizzly bears, elk, and pronghorn antelope. The church denies all the allegations, saying they are the result of media bias or plots to force them off their land, or religious persecution.
We don't have the obligation to tell the entire world what we're doing exactly and explain to them every move that we make.
I don't believe.
So that's the clip, and that was your only soundbite in the entire thing. Did you have an obligation? Do you feel like you would have said things differently, given, if you could teletransport back then?
I mean, I was probably 25 there, and I was just trying to defend, my family and my community from what seemed like a lot of undue media attention and, a lot of people trying to get into our business. But looking back on that, I mean, that was a very petulant thing to say because people were concerned and they had a reason to be concerned.
Right. And for many good reason, because there was this environmental concern, but also just the concern that there's all these weapons being brought in and these shelters and this fear that's being ramped up. And it seems to me that there's something about, both your church and what Michael Flynn is doing is they really are harvesting fear. That's the whole concept, is about taking people that are either fearful and channeling their energy into something, or just making people scared and then bringing them into the flock, so to speak.
It's about trauma. It's about trauma is what ultimately what brainwashes you, because you are dissociated by it, and it makes you vulnerable to basically being indoctrinated with whatever someone wants to put in your head. They do it online.
But why do people voluntarily go into this? Why do people land up? And none of us are psychologists, but why do people
there's nothing. It's not
go for
voluntary at all.
Yeah.
It's not voluntary.
I mean, you don't think it's voluntary?
No.
What's happening that's making it not voluntary?
Well, people are being fooled, right? Nobody brainwashes themselves. That has never happened in the history of mankind. No one has said, "Hey, I'm going to go get brainwashed now." They get fooled into getting put in situations where they end up being traumatized, end up being coerced, and end up in a cult. And suddenly, now their reality is completely different. And I just want to say one thing. I am absolutely astonished and inspired by Sean and his story, and the fact that he got out of that thing with his mind and his morals intact is absolutely astounding. I mean,
it really is.
Thank you, Jim.
In that. And I also want to say the last thing, and then I'll shut up, is it should be an inspiration to everybody who's listening and everyone in the world. It is possible to get out of these things. It really is. No one should give up on their loved ones or 30% of the population, but we have to get educated about what it is, why it's happening, and what the best way is to communicate with victims.
Now, it's never been done on the scale that we're seeing it now. I mean, it certainly seems to be.
Certainly has not.
This is a very different beast than it was in 1990. But even in 1990, getting out of it and the amount of attention you were getting and the judgment on you must have been really impossible to deal with.
Yeah, well, it wasn't really, because by the time I left maybe end of 93. So I had a little bit of time. It wasn't there wasn't so much national attention at that point. And fortunately, I had already known some people in LA and was able to get a job and all that. But I wanted to say something more about why people get into these cults. And I think that because I started doing a documentary on this story, and I haven't succeeded in finishing that documentary because it's just such a sprawling story, and I think I'm too close to it. But one of the things I found out is I went and interviewed a guy named Lorne Dawson, who is a professor of the sociology of religion at the University of Waterloo. And I interviewed him 10 years ago, and I was trying to get an answer from him. Why do people get into these cults? And he talks about the need for meaning. And I think that this is the meaning is a sort of gateway drug that gets people into cults, because everybody's looking for finding some sort of meaning in their lives, and it's the same thing that draws people into religion. But people would rather be dead than lack meaning in their lives, and some of these organizations tend to give them meaning, especially in the sense of persecution, right? Because we felt persecuted in the cult, and I think a lot of Christians feel persecuted in America because they're losing the sort of cultural supremacy that they had for most of American history. And so that persecution complex really feeds into recruitment and getting people in there. And then, of course, the end times, right? The idea of declaring the end times or the apocalypse has a lot to do with saying society has failed. Secular society has failed. Our political system has failed to promote God in the way that we want, and so we have to come apart, be a separate and chosen people. That was one of the actually decrees that we said. Right. Is separating out, and so I think that is what gets people into cults. And a psychologist who I knew well, who was a cult expert, who sadly died this year, her name is Kathleen Mann. And what she said to me about people who get into cults is that almost everyone thinks they're too smart to get into a cult. And it's the people who, like, if you're street smart, you're not going to, but you might not be book smart, you're probably not going to be as attracted to these cults. But people who, college educated, they think they're too smart to fall for it. They're often the ones who get into them. And I have to say, there were a lot of educated people in Church Universal and Triumphant, a lot.
Yeah, it does seem to be a
Intelligence
theme.
has nothing to do with
That's right.
vulnerability to cult. I can list 150, different vulnerabilities. Intelligence really isn't one of them. Like gullibility, sure, I guess,
Vulnerability.
but it's also like, are you depressed? Are you very religious? Are you right wing? Are you racist? Do you do yoga? Are you in New Age? Right? Like, are you a mom? Like, there's a million of these kind of vulnerabilities and sensitivities that people have that these cults, especially Flynn's cults, including QAnon, they specialize the material to specifically target those people.
And they have the data, right? I mean, they've got.
Yes, that's what I was going to say.
Yeah, sorry, go ahead, Heidi.
Well, so the clip he just showed, I think one of the most remarkable things about it is that it could have been made yesterday with Sean Moon and Iron Rod Ministries, note for note, same script, same people. Somebody would have got up and said your part. And I also think that when those of us started seeing our friends in churches radicalized in 2016 and what was happening with perfectly nice people, we didn't know that Cambridge Analytica was working with Glue, which was giving them the data from church people throughout the country. And we didn't know that people affiliated with the Council for National Policy was sending out bullet points to these pastors who essentially function, in my mind, as some sort of gangster in getting people into this. They're dealing with coordinated talking points, coordinating them directly to the vulnerabilities, and that's what you were just speaking of, Zev.
So true. So the other thing that you mentioned, that author, he came up with this, I guess it's a hierarchy, and I wondered if you could talk a little bit towards that, because it's really an interesting way of looking at these cults and how they reinforce sort of these traditional values.
Yeah, so the conservative moral hierarchy, this is from George Lakoff, and this is something that I've really keyed in a lot, and we talk about this a lot on the Radical Secular podcast. And basically, there are a lot of conflicting things about right-wing ideology that don't really seem to make sense until you look at the conservative moral hierarchy, okay? Like, for example, why would somebody be pro-life and then support the death penalty? It doesn't make any sense. But if you look in the conservative moral hierarchy, you realize that the death penalty is discipline, punishment, right? And you see the discipline above the undisciplined, right?
Right.
And that also comes into play with COVID. Because the reason why people who are conservatives don't want the vaccine is they think that means you're weak. If you need a vaccine, if your natural immunity isn't strong enough to fight off this disease, then there's something wrong with you. And that also goes into victim blaming. So if you look in here, take any Republican policy and it will conform to this hierarchy. If something is, wants to improve equality, improve justice for people who've been downtrodden, they're going to be against it. It doesn't matter what it is. If it's money being spent to help the American people, forget about it. Right. If it's money for the military, that falls into, America above other countries, right? It's all part of this hierarchy, and every conservative policy, you need this to analyze it and figure out why they're doing it.
It makes so much sense. And of course, at the very bottom of the rung here is gay people, which is already a theme in what's going on right now with Flynn and the move to remove transsexual rights and other gay rights. I mean, we're really seeing it in real time. We're seeing the same thing with abortion rights. And it all fits into this hierarchy quite well. Terrifying as it might be. I mean, it really is hard to look at, because it really is, it's Nazi Germany. That's what we're looking at. That's what they believe in.
That's the playbook right there.
Yeah.
There's one more, which is abled people over disabled people is one of the most despicable parts of this, especially in the cans and stuff. there's a lot of, hate directed at anyone who has, anything other than normal characteristics.
And there seems to be this theme of this blind devotion, and that brings us to the big lie, which to most people maybe they're thinking the big lie is a political thing, but it's not. It's playing into this cult building because Michael Flynn is going out there and sermoning away about the big lie and making it part of the loyalty test almost for this cult. Like if you believe the big lie, then you're part of the club. You're part of the part of what's going on here. So let's take a listen to a clip from him. And again, your microphones are on.
That's why I know that no way in the world did the American people vote for any of this, and that's why I believe Donald J. Trump is still our president.
So this clip was actually right before the other one.
Okay.
The one where he did the prayer.
Yeah.
This is literally right before.
So he's telling everyone they've got to believe in the big lie, and then he's cementing it with this pledge almost.
Yeah, he does this all the time. He sets people up with these ridiculous patriotic things. Another form of syncretism is taking somebody's patriotism, right, and appropriating it for your own purposes.
Yeah,
like all the flag waving and the "Make America Great Again" and "America First," all that shit is appropriating patriotism into what is effectively Nazi. And
just one
the
more
Nazis
clip.
did that too.
Yeah. So one more clip here is really interesting, related to COVID and what you just mentioned. This is an anti-vax event, but it looks like a church service. They've mixed and matched a lot here. Yeah.
Well, this is one of Flynn's events. This is a guy named Arthur Pawlowski, who's a Canadian preacher who basically has taken it upon himself to infect as many people with COVID as possible.
Really does seem like this is a super spreader event.
No, he's doing it on purpose. This is intentionally. Look. I mean, none of these people are vaccinated. They're all in the cold,
and they're walking around without masks.
And they're piling together and crying on each other because this psychopath is feeding their brains full of bullshit. And so all of these people are just exposing themselves. This guy is a monster. It's Arthur Pawlowski.
And the really the cynical side of it is, and the horrific side of it is that they're also, I think, find it a positive maybe that there are more people of color dying from COVID. So there's the spin-off from going to a super spreader event like this is you then go to your communities and spread it to your communities, which includes people who are non-white, and then those people might be more susceptible to dying. And because all the facts are showing that there's just way more people of color that die from COVID.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. There's like triple.
Yeah. The whole thing is, the whole thing is white supremacy. Find anybody of color in this room.
Right.
I dare you.
You can't. I actually did look because I was like, this is these guys would make a baby going to be okay. It's everybody else.
They brought on stage for exactly that purpose.
Yeah. We're looking at some of the most, that's the kind of thing we would say about Nazi Germany as being, one of the world's most horrific events that are happening right now.
Look at this. They're literally going in a line of people to make sure that every single person will infect every other person. They could have a French kissing contest, I guess, to make it worse.
Well, the scary part is his devotion is so crazy that, what happens when he wants to, rebel against the next election with his forces. Yeah. You follow this logically to where it's going.
Voltaire quote in your pictures there? I think you do.
I think I do. I gotta just find it. But yeah, go ahead.
While he's looking for the Voltaire quote, I'll tell you the scariest thing I saw today was when Zeb and I were reviewing the Josh Hawley video. So here you have somebody who's not twitchy like Flynn is, not wearing a wig like Trump. He actually is a very, very, very handsome, right out of Central Casting. And I find him to be very dangerous because he does the shtick very well. So for me, we have to look out for the next generation of this, the next level of this, and I find him to be quite frightening. Maybe you can speak on that while Zev is looking for the Voltaire.
I found the Voltaire clip to speak to both.
He's been funded by Peter Thiel.
Yeah.
Since he was a pup. I mean, he's I say jokingly, but not kiddingly, that he was probably trained at Eric Prince's Wyoming Ranch. He's got that he knows what he's doing, right?
Absolutely.
He's kind of feeding the psyop perfectly. This is my favorite quote to describe what's happening now. Those who can make you believe absurdities can make you commit atrocities, right? So that's why they basically break your ability to think critically, right? Right. They traumatize you and dissociate you and literally indoctrinate your mind, refreeze you back into the community, and you're someone else, right? And it happens gradually over time, but very quickly you're literally a different person. You still look like the same person, you have some of the same memories and all of that, but there's a whole part of you that has been invented by the cult. And that's what's so dangerous about this, is because guys like Hawley, he's a fucking senator, pardon my French. And he's up there brainwashing people.
Let's listen to a second bit of him here. Let's listen to a bit.
It's from the book of Judges. I bet you know this story, many of you. It's the story of Gideon. Do you remember this story? Gideon is hiding from the enemy, and the angel of the Lord comes to him, and he says to him, "The Lord is with you, Gideon, O mighty man of valor." Do you remember that? Oh, mighty man of valor. Here's the thing, though. Gideon didn't feel like a mighty man of valor. Gideon was hiding from the enemy. He was all curled up and hiding, and the Lord said to him, "No, you're a mighty man of valor. You're going to raise up. You're going to bless your nation. You're going to help deliver your nation. The Lord's going to do great things through you." Here's what I want to say to you today. It can feel like we're under siege. It can feel like
this is the most insane stuff.
There it is. There it is.
And in a ball. And what I think the Lord is saying to us is, rise up, mighty men and women.
I'm going to just put him all down because I can't listen to any more of it. But
is he a preacher or a senator? I mean, what's going on here? And this is the siege mentality is exactly what was developed to a fever pitch in our cult as well. We felt that everybody was against us, and so I want to say something though about cults and religion in general, and that is that if all of these things appeared completely evil, no one would fall for them. And I think the problem is that with everybody gets something out of religion, this meaning that Lauren Dawson was talking about, and I'm sorry, but this really is a problem with Christianity in general and religion in general, not just cults. And we're seeing a sitting senator speaking to a crowd like a preacher, and just absolutely this is frightening stuff, because a lot of people relate to these stories. A lot of people want to see this kind of religious takeover of our government. They would like it if all 100 senators were talking that way.
I mean, to some extent, although I find it so hard to believe that these are probably the most privileged people in the world. I mean, the white Americans are probably the most privileged class you could be.
This shithead went to Yale. He was in Skull and Bones.
And no, he's a victim. How is he a victim? He's a senator. Has had a path to success paved since he was born, and now here he is. Acting like he's being oppressed. These people are not being oppressed. There's no oppression going on here.
Flynn does this very frequently too. He, if you listen to his Tucker Carlson interview, literally half of it is him talking about how persecuted he is, and most perniciously, he says over and over that when the government attacks him, it's just like attacking the American people.
Right.
Yeah.
That's what he says every single time. And it's an incredibly dangerous lie, right? Because it means he's transferring, this fake persecution that he has to them. They start feeling it, and you build up enough of that stuff, and you get terrorists.
And you've got a man who potentially will be a dictator. I mean, he certainly looks like he's building himself a following that could set him up to be a Fuhrer. I mean, if you have a military coup, you need a general to lead that coup. And, it just feels to me like that's what their intention is. That's where they're going. Go ahead, Sean. I know you want to jump in, and then I'll play some Tucker.
Look at what these people have done since Trump started in the beginning. First thing, he went after judges. He's gone after the media. They've gone after academia. They go after scientists. And then Trump in 2020 went after our elections, right? So basically, you can't trust anyone except me. That's what every cult leader says. Everybody else is lying to you. Don't trust anyone except me. And that is what Flynn is also saying. And that's essentially, that was the entire hour of Tucker Carlson, is that, like, there's two Americas. There's, you know, there's the real America, which is me, Michael Flynn, and you, Tucker Carlson, and Donald Trump, and the stolen election. And then there's the usurpers, who are the Democrats, right?
It's so irresponsible that they're putting, you know, Michael Flynn on for an hour on Fox Nation. It wasn't the main network, but still, they're giving it the Fox brand. This guy is completely bonkers. He's a cult leader. And then he's sitting next to Tucker Carlson, their main anchor, who's nodding his head, you know, obediently and agreeing with anything. Meanwhile, there are about 1,000 mistakes in everything he says. I mean, the thing is, everything is a mistake.
Well, there's not. No, it's literally all a lie. But Tucker is no like small propagandist himself.
Yeah,
right?
that's true.
Right.
Like he's been possibly the most disgusting thing I've ever seen in major media is his Great Replacement Theory campaign.
Yeah.
Which replacement theory is literal neo-Nazi ideology that used to be buried in little tiny chat rooms, you know, in very dark places. And now Tucker's on Fox, like, you know, saying it literally every night. He said it right before Flynn came on. Flynn says versions of it. It is
inciting a racial war.
It is
basically
a much big lie.
I want to play in a little bit of this thing, because I did notice about 10 mistakes in just 1 minute here. So, firstly, you'll hear him talk about the attack on the U.S. troops in Afghanistan, and how he interprets that. He calls for Milley to resign, a bunch of other things, which of course he would never have done, and didn't really want to resign when he was fired by Donald Trump. But let's listen to this, Michael Flynn talking to Tucker Carlson.
At the gate of Kabul International Airfield. I mean, that was, it was I mean, I feel so bad for those young people, because it was an avoidable death.
Yes.
How?
And it's sad. So I mean, that's I feel bad about it, and I'm sick to my stomach.
It goes on here.
I mean,
So
I couldn't live with myself if I was Milley. I would have said, "Look, I've screwed this up. I obviously didn't read the intelligence, or I did something wrong. So, here's my stars. I'm going to resign." I mean, I just can't imagine. I can't imagine that level of leader not feeling, and for anybody in his position to say, "Well, I work for the president, and the president said he has every bit of confidence in me." Well, guess what? The American people probably don't. But I'm telling you, it gets harder and harder for those moms and dads to say to their son or their 17 or 18-year-old son or daughter to say, "Yeah, go join the military," after we just witnessed what we just witnessed. I mean, the 13 that were murdered by the Taliban, the 13 Marines,
not by the Taliban,
a sailor and a soldier that were murdered in that tragedy, that tragic attack at the gate of Kabul International Airfield.
We've heard this stuff. Yeah. I mean, he gets the name wrong of the
2 days. Yeah, that's 2 days after.
It's such a lie.
Prince
yeah,
said there should be a missile attack on Kabul airport.
But he blames the Taliban. That was not a mistake. He was saying Taliban on purpose. He got the airport name wrong. He said it was avoidable error, when of course we all knew it was coming, and we knew where it was coming from. Certainly, Vladimir Putin indicated it was coming well in advance. And can't forget that Michael Flynn. I will never ever lose the image of him at dinner with Vladimir Putin at the RT conference in 2015 must have been. I mean, it's
2015 December.
Yeah,
side by side chatting
with Jill Stein.
Yeah, with Jill Stein. So it's not like we can
running the psyop from the left.
Yeah. So we can more than assume that he is working for the Russians. We know that he's pocketed checks from Turkey for $500,000 for trying to kidnap a cleric. We've seen now that he pocketed $200,000 for the nuclear arms deal. There's odd
Cambridge
bits,
Analytica, NSO.
Yeah,
like
it's
got
all
paid by all of that.
So he is he is for all intents and purposes a foreign spy, and yet he's operating in the United States as a leader, as a preacher, as a cult leader, and nothing can be done about him.
Mainstream media.
Yeah, and nothing can be done about him.
So two things that I just want to say.
Yeah.
One thing is that the right-wing victim machine really started in full force under Nixon, and that is one of the best tools they have. They've played that for decades. Each president, each of their minions, they create this incredible victim thing, and it's a pretty good shtick, and it works pretty well. And of course, part of what you see with Flynn, what you were saying earlier, Sean, is that we're seeing systemic attacks on all democratic institutions on all fronts in order to try to basically destroy what we've built, this democracy that we've built. But one thing that our viewers really want to talk about is Mike Flynn in relation to QAnon, because of course we have been losing people en masse to this radicalization, and we've actually seen people who are so disturbed by this radicalization that they've actually killed family members. So Mike Flynn has blood on his hands.
Oh, they have so much blood on their hands. I mean, it's hard to even talk about when you think about COVID and you think about the anti-vax and how many, I mean, it's 100,000 plus that have died from this propaganda and not getting vaccinated.
Yeah, I'd put it at more than 500,000.
Yeah.
But as far as QAnon,
well, QAnon is sort of the gateway drug for all of this, isn't it? I mean, sort of it's
QAnon,
it absolutely is. The QAnon is an online cult that was created by Maggot 3X. So we've talked about Maggot 3X on the show before. Maggot 3X was headed by Flynn, but it was also Jack Posobiec, Mike Cernovic, and a bunch of those guys.
Right.
And there's all the receipts in the world that they created Pizzagate, and then that moved on to lots of other crazy stuff. They went underground, started playing a lot in 4chan, and basically hit the mark with QAnon in October of 2017. Mike Flynn's fingerprints and associations are literally all the way through.
Right. And Stop the Steal. I mean, there's another big thing. The insurrection, there's another thing too.
Well, that was the payoff. That was the payload, or the first one.
Right.
And unfortunately, it was just a rehearsal. But QAnon was designed from the beginning, and I have the documents that say so, as a way to generate violent terrorism by indoctrinating people into a right-wing cult.
And now we're seeing it in the homeschooling and the school boards. You're seeing these incredible, I think they're terrorist attacks when these school board assaults are happening and even out of school, people are being followed around and stalked and threatened with violence. I mean, this is in the heartland of America. It's terrorism.
He calls it local action has a national impact.
Well,
yes.
And it's around schools.
What that means is terrorism.
Yeah.
Because when you take an act in order to manipulate political feeling, what you're doing with fear, what you're doing is terrorizing people for a political purpose.
This whole thing seems like a giant terror attack. Like it feels like that's
literally a terror attack.
Yeah, on a national scale.
If you think about this, and I know that this has been said before, but I just want to reiterate that the QAnon content is very much like the blood libel story that has been used against Jews for centuries. And that's something that we can't forget, that this has an anti-Semitic component. And it is all this victimology as well, right? Stop the Steal, the Great Replacement. It's all like, something is being taken from us. And that is what has brought these people together. And we can't stress enough how much this victim narrative is driving all this. And this is the dominant, most powerful group of people in the country. With
the most weapons, who are buying extra, ammunition, and other Moonies are buying farms in Tennessee as bases or spiritual retreats. It's pretty daunting. I want to talk back to QAnon. I think both you, Jim, and Dave Troy have been on the show and said that QAnon has its roots within military intelligence or within intelligence, in the intelligence world. Do you still think that? Is that an accurate assessment?
I don't know if I ever.
Or maybe it was Dave Torres that said
it. I mean, QAnon is a domestic terror plot, basically. That was funded and helped by foreign actors, but it's not a foreign. It's not wasn't a Russian operation. It
but
wasn't
an
like the
intelligence operation.
IRA.
I mean, look at Flynn. He's an intelligence guy.
I
And
think
there were a lot of
that's
other-
the point right there.
There are plenty of people with intelligence background who were involved in QAnon. 100%. Robert
Right.
David Steele,
Yeah.
Michael Flynn. I could name 15. Bill Binney. There's a whole bunch of them that were legitimately in the intelligence community and basically turned into QAnon leaders.
Right.
There's a couple other generals, Spalding and McInerney is another one.
Right.
There are a bunch of these Vallely. I could keep going.
Right.
There's a
These are
bunch of
Americans. These are Americans with
they're
intelligence
military
knowledge,
guys.
so they know how to do this.
Overtly part of talking about QAnon and helping out the cause. Doesn't mean that the only thing I bristle about a little bit is that Q is military intelligence. Q is a LARP. Q is bullshit. It was just an act that allowed them to psyop people with this fake presence.
Sorry.
There was the military intelligence was just the assholes behind it who were trying to figure out how to brainwash people on the
How
internet.
to radicalize people
Right.
and get them to show up at the insurrection and try to, hang Mike Pence. It's all so dark.
Well, this is what psyops are, right? I mean, this all what we're looking at here is all psyops. This is the art of psychological warfare, and this is what we're seeing on all these events. You have to be pretty skilled to get this out, to get this done. You don't just get this to exist unless you've got those.
Well, we
those
have
skills.
to acknowledge it as a people.
Yeah.
The reason why I yell so loud and so much is because we just need to understand what's happening. Like we are literally at war, but only one side knows.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Like all of this bipartisanship and all these old ideas about how politics works needs to go out the goddamn window. We should follow the law, and that's it. This is a cult that will do anything and everything they can to destroy democracy and install a fascist theocracy. That's literally what they want.
Yep.
And until
How
we start
do we
as
stop
a human
them,
being,
Jim?
as a country, recognize that situation is just going to get worse.
So that Heidi's question is very pertinent. How do we stop them?
How do we stop them? How do we stop this? There's more of us. We have viewers begging to know what we can do and how we can stop them.
Pretty straightforward, honestly. We have to shut down the goddamn disinformation. I mean, first of all, Telegram needs to go away forever. It is a absolute cesspool nightmare of Nazis, cult leaders, brainwashing. I'm in there all day, or not all day, but a lot of the day, every day, because that's where it's happening.
Right.
There's, I don't know, 600 or 700 million people on that platform now. There are no guardrails whatsoever. And literally every kind of horrendous shit you can imagine is exploding there, because everybody moved from Facebook and Twitter, where there were kind of still some rules. They were doing their cult shit, but they couldn't get crazy. Telegram, they don't care.
And Telegram is a Russian operation.
Yeah.
It's a Russian guy who lives in the UAE, for God's sake.
Yeah. That tells you
It's
everything you need to know.
It's
National
an enemy,
security
like,
stuff.
platform.
Yeah.
And it needs to go away, because I'm in there and I see people that I know. I have an account that's hidden, but my number's in there, so I see when people I know come in, and it's like every day another dozen people, usually the ones that I would see as vulnerable, like just getting sucked into that nightmare all the time.
And the same thing would go for
we can't do anything. We cannot fix a damn thing until we get rid of that, until we get rid of OAN and Newsmax and fucking Tucker Carlson, if not Fox altogether.
And Facebook.
That is the only
all
way
of them.
that we are going to stop this.
We sort of need to get back to basics and get away from social media at all. But I mean,
turn the goddamn internet off would certainly help.
It might
Here's
be the
what's going
solution.
on, though. I think all of these things are basically confirmation bias engines, right, for people. And people are being told what they want to hear. That's why this PSYOP is working, because they figured out how to tell people what they want to hear and then slip in these messages as well. Because the anti-vaxxers, they already didn't like big pharma. They already didn't like science, and just goes on. The racists already believe the white replacement theory. So you tie all these people together and you tell them what they want to hear, and it is a perfect storm for disinformation.
It really is. We're out of time, but I want to just quickly take a look at some of these great photos and just to change the tone a little bit here of you as a young boy, really. Well, it makes you a young adult, I guess. And you were traveling around the world, and you got a chance with your mom to meet some people in Liberia. Just talk us through some of these pictures. They're really interesting.
Okay, well, that is Africa in 1972. That is Ghana, and that's when my father was still alive. And this here is Liberia in 1978. We had a state visit with President Tolbert, who was later deposed in a coup. That is me meeting the president. Yeah.
In your Brady Bunch attire.
Yeah.
How old were you then?
And I believe, let's see, 70, I would have been like 14.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's my mom at a state luncheon. And that is me with my mother in Montana when I was about 15.
I think that's what we have in that group there. But those are great pictures. What were you doing in Liberia? What was the rationale behind going there?
Well, yeah. So this is what I want to say is my mother was doing what a lot of these, evangelicals and preachers are doing, which is, they fail at co-opting the American government because we have too many democratic protections and things like that. So they go to these other countries and they speak to them about, starting theocracy. And it's happened in Uganda. It's now happening in Ghana again, where there's a whole LGBT crackdown going on there. And these organizations have figured out that they can go to many parts of the world where there's not strong democratic protections and implement, God government in some way, which, means repression of LGBT, repression of atheists, on and on like this.
Goes right back to that hierarchy you mentioned earlier.
Right back to the hierarchy. And so that is what we were there doing. My mother minored actually in political science. And so she had that background, and like we talked about earlier, she did work for the UN at one point, and she had this kind of idealism, but she injected her spirituality into that mission. So go tell these African presidents how to run their country in a more religious way, right? And this is the same thing.
This is all stuff that she came up with herself. Like she wasn't. I mean, it's kind of bizarre to just go to Liberia. I mean, was there what
I don't know.
I mean, I wouldn't go
honestly,
there.
I don't. I know you don't just call up the president of Liberia and say I'm coming over. But,
right.
We had some people in Africa. We had a fairly robust congregation in Ghana, and there was a guy there who had his name was Herbert Kraku, and he had some pull and he knew people. So I think he talked my mother up and said, we got with this evangelical woman is coming from America, and he set up these state visits, I think.
Thank you so much for being here tonight, Sean Prophet and Jim Stewartson. I'm going to give you both an opportunity to advertise your whatever it is you want to advertise, your podcast and your Twitter handles would be really great for the audience. So why don't you go, Sean?
Okay, well, it is the Radical Secular podcast, and that is Radical Secular, theradicalsecular.com is our website, and @radicalsecular is our Twitter handle. And we release new shows once a week on Mondays. And our mission is justice, equality, and rational public policy.
Those are good ones. Jim, where can people find you?
I just yell on Twitter. So just put my name into Twitter. And
so it's @Jim Stewartson. Yeah. Okay. Great. Thank you both very much for being here. It's been a really fascinating hour, and thank you for digging up that tape and combining it. It's really fascinating.
Thanks for having me, Zev and Heidi.
Thank you. Heidi, I'm going to keep Heidi for a few minutes here, just so we can chat and debrief. But thank you, gentlemen, and we'll be hopefully having you back on the show in the near future. Thank you.
Thanks.
Wow, that's a really fascinating hour and a bit we just did there. So interesting. What are your takeaways?
Well, one thing I want to say is that Jim Stewartson does the work that most of us can't do. He is lurking in the cesspools of the dark web to bring us the news and bring us how these people are being radicalized. And we here give him credit, but I don't think he gets the credit he deserves for all the news that he breaks. So I wanted to say that. I think the other thing is it wouldn't be Narrative Live if we didn't point out that the new members of Elizabeth Clare Prophet's cult are being recruited from South America and Russia.
Interesting. I thought they didn't really have cults over there. They had a big crackdown on them, but I guess some of them sneak in. It's remarkable that Sean he seems so well adjusted and together and everything after all he's been through. I mean, that can't have been an easy transition for anybody to go through, and he certainly has come on the other side doing the right kind of work and doing it well, and as a well-adjusted human being. So it's really impressive that he's been able to do that. I will say that there's something. I don't know how to put my finger on it, but there's something about the allure of people coming towards these cults that is greater than just fear. I mean, we think of it as just fear, but I think that there's such a desire to belong and such
Community.
a desire to get out of their lonely existences, and they're constantly trying to find, all our lonely existences for that matter.
Right.
Finding a place to be and finding a place to belong is so important. And these are the available places that they have. These are the available platforms. And, we need to start cultivating some alternatives. We need to be cultivating, equally as interesting and exciting alternatives that support democracy and equality and values that really matter to people, and that democracy itself is a good gathering point for something to believe in. And we sort of have to reignite that patriotism, that reignite that whole passion for democracy, because it is a remarkable system. It's the only country in the world that's been able to do this for this long. And it's absolutely no reason why we should stop now, except for this crazy brainwashing. We need to get back to that fiery, really important pride that we used to have in democracy itself, because there's so much there, and America's all about that. So thank you. That is it for Narrative tonight. I feel like we've been on all week, because this is now Thursday, and I'm back tomorrow with LB and Greg Oliar in the after show. Who knows what will happen? Who knows what will happen in the after show?
Hopefully
tomorrow.
You'll have a Greg Sports Minute again, because that was hilarious.
You know what? It's funny about that is I had no idea who Kiri, whatever his name was, and then every day this week I'll be like, oh, that's Kiri. So Greg was was smarter than the rest of us. So we'll maybe do a little sports tomorrow. That's the show for tonight. Thank you very much for joining us on Narrative. As always, please go to patreon.com/narrative and help support our show by joining up there. And we'll be back. Heidi and me will be back on Tuesday. I'll be back tomorrow with the after show with LB and Greg. Have a good night, everybody.
That was a perfect
Narrative
episode.
is made possible by viewers like you. Join today and support truly independent journalism at patreon.com/narrative. That's patreon.com/narrative.